I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. Ooh, I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised we'd be cordial.
Hi everyone, Kristen Sunanta Walker here, and I'm back with one of our guests that always has a huge number of listens and is an incredible psychotherapist. She's also an author, a blogger, and a speaker. We've talked many times about the change triangle, which actually has helped me in my own therapy. Hilary Jacobs Hendel, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm so happy to be back.
Now, we talked about your book the last time you were here, but what's fascinating is it's actually won some awards, one of them being the 2018 winner for Best Book Award for your book, It's Not Always Depression, sponsored by American Book Fest. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I am very honored and very thrilled because it'll, again, help get the word out more that I'm trying to share, that I've become so passionate about how we need to understand emotions. Because there's so many misconceptions about them. Mm-hmm.
There are, and I find it's so obvious to me, and I think to many people in the field, but it's not obvious outside the bubble of mental health in general society. And that I come up against that every so often, and I have to remind myself, right, you're in a little bubble where people care about it, but that's a very small bubble.
Absolutely. And I would say the bubble is really in a small group of psychotherapists and people who practice and have had the opportunity to have this kind of specialized education. But in my world still in New York City, people understand theoretically that emotions are important, but they don't know things, for example, that emotions are physical sensations, and that you have to work with them in the body and not just kind of create interpretations and understanding. That helps, but there's a whole world of emotion science that changes the way that we can all, as individuals, lay people, work with our own emotions to feel better, and that therapists can help people with their emotions to heal and recover from psychological distress.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about some of the myths out there about emotions.
Yes, I think that's important. And maybe you could tell me some of the ones that you've heard, but the main ones that I hear in my practice and that I've experienced myself growing up before I learned all this was the idea that emotions are for weak people, that we're really not supposed to have emotions, that the less you experience emotional overwhelm, the better, the more it says about your strength. Did you growing up, is that something that you got that impression from in your family? Yeah.
Of course, and a lot around women and them being hysterical just because we're emotional. There was a ton of that going on in my family.
Yes. And in fact, right, the kind of gets emphasized on women, but men with, the justification of being angry, being sexual, those are all emotions.
And I certainly have done some work with people some men specifically, where they did some really uncomfortable things, but they feel entitled to do so because they're men. And when I confronted them about it, I actually confronted one of them on a show. about it, and his response was, well, it's not any different than how I've always treated my wife. And of course, everyone listening in my audience was aghast and said, well, that's part of the problem, honey. So where do you go with, when you're dealing with that? Maybe they do know, or they have been told that they're acting like a cretin, or whatever it may be, but they just feel entitled to do so. And so they are not going to look at what that behavior does to the people around them.
Yeah, I mean, what I do, it always begins with explaining what emotions are, what their purpose is, and really driving home the idea that, on the internal side, understanding emotions has to do with understanding that they are survival mechanisms and programs that are not under conscious control, that get activated in the midbrain, that aren't thoughtful processes, and that we can, by understanding that is the vehicle or the beginning of being able to use emotions constructively in relationships and in the world, as opposed to destructively, as you just gave in your example of somebody who abuses their wife or other people.
Right, and or other people.
Yes.
Let's talk about then the definition of emotion, so we can just start from, a basic understanding of what are they? What exactly are they?
Yes. And not only what are they, but why is it that, again, this other myth that you can just get over it is a myth. So again, emotions, which have been written about scientifically as early as Charles Darwin at the turn of the century, are, again, these survival programs that are part of the mammalian brain that they adapted because when we had these automatic reactions that basically tell us what's dangerous and what we should get away from and what is good for us and what we should move towards, that humans were able to evolve and survive longer, in terms of the whole trajectory of evolution of humanity. So they evolved to help us adapt to the world and to thrive and progress. But because of how they work and where they're located in the brain, they happen automatically, and we can't prevent them from happening. We can only modify them and work with them once they do happen. So an emotion, you could think of it as a core emotion, which are the survival emotions, are these hardwired programs. And they have certain characteristics about them, 3 or 4 main characteristics. One is that they are physical experiences because they're designed to bring about an action, and that action is meant to be adaptive for us as an individual, in terms of like a selfish way, like what's good for me, how can I survive? And they create impulses, yes, and create impulses. So those are sort of the main characteristics that really are a paradigm shift from, instead of trying to think your way through an emotion, which is impossible, we have to work with them as physical sensations and recognize and name, I'm having anger right now, for example, or I'm having sadness, and I know I'm feeling this because it's creating a sensation in my body. For example, with anger, I feel energy, with an impulse to, want to punch or say something mean, and to be able to work with that so that the very last step, as we say in AEDP therapy, is then to think through. Then we bring on our thinking brain of how to work with this emotion and even whether to translate it into some sort of action or words. So does that make sense?
And
it does. I can give an example.
It totally makes sense. Yeah, go ahead and give an example.
Well, the holidays are coming up, right? And everybody gets cracked around the holidays because families bring up a cocktail of emotions depending on how our lives have been with our families. And how difficult or easy it's been and what's gone on, whether families are separated in modern life where you have to choose between which parent to go to or which kid is going to come. So, or let's say you have a parent who's basically critical, and even as adults, right? I help a lot of people prepare for going home for the holidays.
Right.
My latest blog post was for November and December will be about the holidays. So, let's say when you go home, you end up feeling small, right? That you wait for sort of an onslaught of criticisms, and not that parents even mean to do damage. They also don't understand their emotions, and so they have a thought and they just say it.
Right.
So you can predict that if you're feeling small, that you're probably having some shame or some contraction to defend against feeling angry because you don't want to, lash out, or this is something that the brain did to accommodate to the particular family life. So what I meant is, so you can go home and have a giant fight where everybody is, quote, acting out their anger, or you could go home and do some internal work to help you to process and make use of the anger in a way that gets you through the day without having any regrets for how you behaved, and helping you stay big within yourself and as confident and adult as you can. So there's many, many, many different ways to work with emotions, from the way that we see in our culture and society and the world at large that are destructive, right? That's what wars are about pretty much now, is just acting out rage. Or this kind of mindfulness, as I call the change triangle, mindfulness with a map of how do I work with each of these different emotions that are natural, that we all have, in a way that my life goes in a positive direction, and my relationships do, and my work life does. And there's a lot we can learn and do.
Absolutely. So many things. First of all, a mindfulness map is like another series name in my world. So many things nuggets to grab on and share with the people that are helpful, so helpful. One of the things that I found really interesting is that you don't have to go home for the holidays. Like, you could take a year off from doing any of that and without guilt, and without having guilt assigned to you that you accept. Now, the guilt, listen, I'm not going anywhere for the holidays this year. This is the first year, I'm 48 years old, that I'm going to be spending the holidays completely by myself. And I have zero guilt about that. I think it's fantastic. Now, is there guilt being put on me for that? Absolutely. But I don't assign it to myself. It doesn't affect my emotional state, because I've done so much work around.
I was going to say, you've done your work, right? Because that's not an easy thing to do. Yes.
Exactly.
But it is possible. And I think that's wonderful, right? That there's many different ways to deal with the holidays. And I definitely advocate that, especially in homes that are actively toxic, where there's active alcoholism and drug addiction, and active abusive behavior. And it's just, we have to all take care of our own mental health. And sometimes that means setting hard limits and boundaries that feel bad. And I think it's important for people to know it's okay to feel sad, that instead of feeling guilty, to just lean into kind of mourning for the self, and then to take care of oneself and say, it makes sense that I'm sad. I'm disappointed by my family. I have to take care of myself, and therefore I am denied the family that I wanted and deserved, which is a loving family.
Right.
And that it's okay to take care of myself. In fact,
Absolutely.
There's no point in me going down with the ship. I have to work, I have to live, and so we have to take care of ourselves.
I know, no one likes commercials, but seriously, folks, without the help from these organizations, we could not stay on the air. Please give a shout out to zencharts.com. If you're a mental health or addiction treatment center, you'll want to use their EHR. It's gorgeous. And they're just good people. And also MyGenetics, MyGenetx.com, because knowing your genetic code empowers your mental health treatment. And lastly, copenotes.com. We love getting positive messages right to our phones every day from Johnny Crowder. He's the lead singer of Prison, a heavy metal band sharing their music about suicide prevention, addiction recovery, and mental health. See, that was painless. Support them as they support us. Back to the show.
Yeah, you can get to a place where you are not being, you're not in your lizard brain. You're not being run amok, and you're just this open wound that's on fire. And so anybody that does anything, you don't have the emotional wherewithal to stop it, think about it, and process it, and then behave differently, because you're just this raw nerve walking around. You can take a break and do your work and feel really empowered and be around those situations, and they go in different places. I've talked to people about, I got to a point where I started playing games. Well, I know Uncle Joe's I'm making up a name, but I know Uncle Joe's gonna try to pinch my rear end. Completely inappropriate. Nobody tells him no. It's awful. I'm usually the one that would end up screaming at him, and then I would be told that I'm horrible while he's pinching all the little girls and women's rear ends. And instead, I got to a point where I was like, I'm not carrying that bag of baloney, and Uncle Joe, that's not appropriate. Don't do it. Stay away from him. And then count how many times he does it to everybody. And the minute that he got to number 10, I would laugh and say, that was my cue to leave, knowing that that's going to happen. There's nothing I can do about it. I can stay out of the line of fire. And when he gets to 10, I'm out. That's me having power with my emotions at a situation. But it's very difficult. You can't go from raw nerve to power in one swoop. It takes a lot of work.
A lot of work, exactly. I shared, I like to share a lot about myself in my writing blog. And the book, I just published a story about Thanksgiving for me when my sister got married. When I was in my 30s, she all of a sudden, promised her new husband that she would spend Thanksgiving in Memphis, Tennessee with his family from then on. And it was the most important holiday for me. And I had spent every Thanksgiving, because it was really the only family holiday we had where I had an intact, and I have a small family. And here in this situation, I just mentioned it, nobody was doing anything wrong. In fact, my sister was just trying to be a good wife. And yet, I was really hurt and wanted her to feel bad, right? Because I wanted her to feel guilty that she was ruining Thanksgiving for me, this holiday that meant so much to me. And I tried so hard to behave well because I didn't want to act out, because I love her. And I knew intellectually she had no choice. And still, every year the name of this article I named Thanksgiving Groundhog Day, because I felt that same bad mood, that yucky, kind of angry, guilty, sad for myself mood every year come over me. And finally, I just got sick of it one year, and I was armed with emotion education. I had now done my training as a therapist, which you may remember I did later in life, and I was able to process that feeling so that it wasn't like a repeat of every year. And then, like you said, got creative with my Thanksgiving. And I still missed my sister, but it didn't ruin Thanksgiving anymore. And I joined up with my friend's family to do Thanksgiving, and even this year they're away. So just my mother and my husband and I are going to go to a restaurant. It's tiny, and that would have devastated me years ago. And
I know.
It doesn't. And it's all because of understanding emotions and trauma and everything that we can't talk our way through. We have to experience young parts of us, and we have to experience feelings in our body. And it's doable. It's practice.
It is. It's so much practice, and people don't realize how much practice it takes to do it. And
lifelong practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think
but
living
it's exciting, right? Because you grow. It's like an onion. You get peeled in layers, and and
you expand. And your whatever work you do in this area is going to bleed into every other area of your life, because that's what being a human being is. That's how we tick. That's our makeup. So it's not like it's isolated work that's only going to hopefully be a resolution to feeling better and in this one area of your life, it's going to have a trickle up and down effect in every other place.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so getting back to myths and facts about emotions, maybe just to let whoever's listening know that it's okay to feel bad, right? A lot of people are feeling bad around the holidays. It doesn't say anything about you because holidays bring up emotions, and emotions just are. We can't help them. We can only help how we cope with them. And it's okay. And really, we should strive to be compassionate and gentle with ourselves, even if we're feeling angry, because that's painful too.
Yes, yes. And to have the wherewithal to look at that, I think the myth, you said it in the very beginning, the permission to feel them, to not say, it's impossible. And it's such a fallacy to tell people, just stop thinking about it, just let it go. I can't even think of the more disserviceable thing out there. And hopefully I didn't just make up a word, disserviceable. Please don't Google it.
Yeah, I like it though. Yeah. Right.
I'm sure I made
that
up
it's doing a disservice.
Yeah. And it's like, and it isn't real. It's not real. We can't just let it go. You have to process this stuff. Otherwise, you stuff it down, and then you have things like alcohol, after drinking too much alcohol to stuff it, too much food, all these other ways that it may show up in your life because you're stuffing down something that is impossible to stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So the biggest myth for me, what I'm getting out of this too, is that myth around that your emotions are easily just don't pay attention to them. That's the big myth right there. Before we even get into different flavors of what types of emotions, just that you could easily discard them is the biggest myth. Right out of the
exactly. Which is indicated, you hear it all the time in when people say things like suck it up or just get over it or you're too sensitive. No. I'm not too sensitive. Maybe you're not sensitive enough. That happens. What you're too sensitive when someone says that to you. It's really saying, if the person goes back to an I statement, which I try to teach my patients to do, is I don't have the capacity to help you, be with you, tend to you, even bear the emotions that you're having right now. And that doesn't make the other person bad, and it doesn't even make me bad. It just is, and we have to find other solutions. But the idea, that you're not bad if you're feeling something, you're not bad just because your parents have made you, a lot of people feel bad because if they're angry at their parents and they feel bad about themselves that they don't have good relationships. No, it's not your fault.
Right. And it made me think of another term that I'm probably making up or someone else coined it already, but we should do a whole talk on emotional offloading because good people do it and people who behave in very toxic ways do it. And we're taught to do it.
Yes, I think you're talking about what I would call acting out emotions.
Acting out emotions, but also not taking responsibility for your emotions. I see this with a lot of people that blame shift and that bait and switch conversations. And you're like, well, that's not what we were talking about before. But then when you say I'm uncomfortable with it, they turn around and go, what's wrong with you that you're uncomfortable? That whole toxic dynamic of manipulation. Right. Those are people that love to offload their emotions. They're not feeling the responsibility for how they are inflicting uncomfortable behavior on other people. They're blaming you for everything inappropriate and abusive they're doing. And I call that emotional offloading.
Yes, right, exactly. And it's so common. And again, all these things, I really believe why I'm such so passionate about that every person should have emotion education starting in elementary school and up through, is that once you really have a clear understanding of emotions, it becomes very hard to continue to behave in destructive ways because it's you understand. It's like when you find out that a particular food has pesticides or is bad for you, it's very hard to eat that food anymore because you don't want to hurt yourself. So just the basic education in emotions and, having tools like the change triangle really make a difference for people.
Absolutely.
And in relationship. Yeah.
Right, your relationships with yourself, to yourself, and your relationships with others.
Exactly,
well,
and they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Well, we're gonna have more talks, listeners. We're doing a quick reintroduction of Hilary to since her show was a while ago, and her work has had a profound impact on my life and my journey. So outside of thinking that I'm nuts most of the time, if any of you think I know what I'm doing, sometimes a lot of it is because of her work. So
that's so lovely. I'm so delighted to hear that. Can I mention that I have free resources on my website?
Please
growing
tell
all
your
the time.
Your website, all that.
Yeah.
Please.
You can Google the Change Triangle. You can go to thechangetriangle.com or HilaryJacobsHendel.com, and there's a blog that has many different themes, but it's all around trying to impart emotion education. And there's a toolbox section of the website which I keep adding to that has videos and how to ground and breathe and begin to work with emotions and understanding what they are. And then of course the whole enchilada is in the book, which you can ask to get at your library. I really wrote to be a labor of love, although I have to, Random House has to sell it, but it's a basic emotion education. I don't think there's any other book that kind of concisely explains emotions without any jargon. It's not like a textbook, and there's a bunch of stories that show how you work from states of distress through emotions, which are really the doorway to feeling calm for scientific reasons, but not to get jargony, just to leave it at that. But the book will explain why.
Yeah. And listeners, you know me, I butcher everybody's name, even if I've known them forever. So I said Hendel, and it's Hendel. And a year ago, I would have been flattened and mortified at my behavior. And now, because of all the work, some of your work, Hilary, is like, whatever. This is a faux pas of mine. It's part of my quirk, and I don't need to be upset about that. I can just.
That's right, because there's so many wonderful things about it. You don't have to be perfect. None of us are perfect. We're all deeply flawed, and we can all love and connect each other despite our flaws. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we will have you back on again.
Good. Let's keep talking.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps. Or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it.
Good boy.